Ready when you are.
Sorry.
Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 27th of April. And it's great to be back in the chamber. So we have several people online. I think we've got 8 councillors online and the balance in the chamber. So just bear with patience between working through the 2 mediums. So I will just go through the housekeeping, and the meeting has been recorded and will be live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. Health and safety for those ones in the chamber, if you just follow the screen, there's no members of the public here, so I don't need to go through, but just be conscious of the fact that we're still in orange, and please adhere to the protection framework for COVID with your social distancing and masks, and just be cautious of people, please. Online participants, please keep your cameras on and microphones muted. And in the chamber, for questioning, to make it easier for us, so those councillors in the chamber, we are using the little machines just for putting yourself in the queue, not for voting. So, and if you need to have an amendment, please text an amendment or email the committee administrator if you're online. And I think that's all I need to do. So we are ready to go. And I just wanted to note that on the agenda there's page 10. There was a couple of errors in it, so you've all got copies of page 10, and that's attachment 6, the financial statements. That's not an additional item, that's just an amendment to correct the information. So now I will move on to our order of business. So first up, we have apologies, and I have an apology from Councillor Dennison. Is there any other apologies? I'm not aware. Okay, so I'm happy to move the apologies. I have a seconder, Councillor Naylor. All those in favour in the I'll just wait to get those others on screen and then we can see them. Right, so all those in favour, raise your hand. And anyone against, and any abstentions? Councillor Johnson, we can't seem to, I think you might have frozen. We'll fix you up, don't worry.
Yes, I have frozen, Madam Chair, but I'm voting in favour.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay. Next, item number 2. Is there any notifications of additional items? I don't have any. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3. Is there any declarations of interest? I'm not aware of any. And item number 4, public comment. I'm unaware of any public comment. Okay, so item number 5 is confirmation of the minutes. And I'm happy to move that the minutes of the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 23rd of March 2022, Part 1, public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. Seconder, Councillor Naylor. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Anyone against? And any abstentions? Councillor Meehan is an abstention. Councillor Johnson, can you confirm verbally, please?
Oh, yes, in favour. Sorry, is my screen still frozen?
Yes, that's all right. We'll just come to you when we've got issues, because you can't probably see it.
I can see everybody and all of your screens are moving. I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah,
I'll try
okay.
turning my camera off and on for a bit.
Okay, we'll sort it, no worries. Okay, we now move on to item number 6, which is the Wakakatahi Recreational Pathways Fund associated with Te Hua-Turanga Highway. So we have Kathy Diva-Todd, the Group Manager of Parks and Logistics. No, we don't. We have Aaron Phillips. And we have Sarah Sinclair, General Manager of...
Sorry, my apologies through the chair. Yes, Kathy's had to go to an interview this morning, so Aaron is standing in for her, but I'm also here to answer questions.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sure Aaron will be fine. So over to you, Aaron, when you're ready. And that's on page 15, councillors.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mayor and councillors. An excellent opportunity to bring forward a funding opportunity to you. I'll take the report as read, but do want to just cover over a quick overview of it since it's relatively new to us. There is a $1 million fund available for the paths and the communities associated with the new highway. The proposal before you aligns with the direction that's been developed through the Te Apiti or Manawatu Gorge Master Plan, and colloquial terms at the moment it's called the Three Bridges Project. That's part of that master plan. There is a major barrier to the Three Bridges loop in the Saddle Road. It's a Saddle Road Bridge, which is a long, narrow bridge, which doesn't have any separated cycle, pedestrian or equestrian facilities on it, which is why option 2 is the preferred option. Option 2 recognises and seeks to address that particular barrier with some investigation and consideration so that any future proposals to complete a full loop are well considered before it's committed to. There has been some further information come to light since the report was written that I'd like to bring your attention to, and I apologise to some of my colleagues that this is being landed on them at this meeting as well. We had some preliminary desktop engineering advice commissioned rapidly to look at the proposal. They are suggesting that our allowance for the consenting investigations and design components of the project and the costs and the attachments is low, and that we need to allow more. There's always a tension between doing a great job at that investigation stage and spending more money on the investigations than the construction almost. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but to make a point. So I'd like to suggest to the council, to the committee, that an increase is in the consenting design and investigations budget is added to the proposal, and that the total application be increased to $551,000, an increase of $35,000 over what you see in the paper before you. Apologies that wasn't circulated earlier in the meeting. Just timing of meetings, COVID's, holidays, and the commissioning the report didn't allow that to be done in a proper manner. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Aaron, just a question for myself. In 2.7, the issues domain, there's a note there which it allows 60K per year for the reserve management planning. So and it says per year for the reserves. So is that an ongoing 60,000 every year? And has any of that money been allocated to this project?
It's a separate project, program, councillor, for reserve management planning across the city. It's been used in the past to do audits of our reserve status and classification and prepare some of our reserve management plans. That current planning is to use that for the development and management plan for Ashurst itself, which is a little bit behind in the timeline.
So you're not using any of that budget for?
Not for this project,
okay,
no.
That's fine.
It's just a related matter.
Okay. Next up is Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Aaron. Just looking at the risks under option 2, you've only listed 2 risks. Do you actually see with this project that there would be any more risks to it? In terms of you telling us that the cost blowout has already gone up from 516,000 to 551,000. Do you sort of see there's any more risk to the project?
In terms of cost risks, there are cost risks. Most of those revolve, particularly in this case, around the proposed reinstatement of what's been called the pony trail from the terrace down to McRae's Bush. At the moment, the preliminary engineering advice has quite a big range in the costs that could be. Our estimate sits roughly in the middle of that. The higher end for an earth ramp, and we're at the low end if some board walking is required. I can never sit here at this stage of a project with this level of investigations completed and promise that we've nailed it, but at this stage, it's our best advice.
So in your opinion, does the benefits still outweigh the risk?
Certainly it's a great opportunity given that the capital funding is not coming from council. So the costs and the risks in terms of costs can be managed in that we can modify the program as we go if we need to. So if we get an extra $50,000 in costs and you say, no, we're not putting any money in, or the fund won't accommodate them, we can modify some of the projects within the program and still achieve it, just not to the full extent. And sorry, I've lost my train of thought from the question there.
That's all right. Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions for you, Aaron. Thank you for the report. The first would be to understand what engagement council has had with other groups, noting that this is a broad recreational fund. And I'm thinking of groups like the Manawatu Mountain Bike Club that have aspirations in the Te Apiti area, and possibly other groups. Could you just give us a sense of how it's gotten to this stage and how those groups have been engaged with?
So there's been a number of community meetings that Waka Kotahi have held for the project, and the various community representatives from clubs and groups have sat in those meetings, and some of my colleagues, council officers, have sat in those meetings and listened to the fund's terms and conditions. As it states in the report, we think that the project aligns well with some of the aspirations of the community that were expressed in those meetings, and it aligns with the the Te Apiti master plan, which has various stakeholders and community groups aligned with it. We haven't sat down with the likes of the Manawatu Mountain Bike Club and attempted to prioritise whether their proposals for tracks versus this proposal along the terrace, whether one or other is better. We've followed the strategic direction of the master plan and put this forward.
Thank you. So I guess in terms of looking at what might be coming at that fund, we're putting up potentially a proposal that would seek over half the investment that's available from Wakatahi on this side, and trying to secure that on this side of the ranges. So we could be effectively going head-to-head with some other groups in Palmerston North and Manawatu as well.
That is a risk, yes.
Thank you. Second question, would it be fair to say that both of these options in the long term are headed in the same direction, but that the option being recommended by officers is simply to stage and make sure that we have a full feasibility around the Three Bridges loop before we actually sign off on it?
That's correct. We started out with the vision of the full loop, but as we identified risks and costs, we derived option 2. And if option 2's investigations prove some viable options for addressing the concerns, then future projects could consider the full loop.
Thank you. So within scope for that feasibility would be traffic modeling around Saddle Road once Te Ahua Tauranga is rolling and Saddle Road becomes again a highly disused, quiet road?
Yes, we would seek some traffic engineering advice on volumes, speeds and options for managing traffic and whether there's options for cycling, pedestrian and equestrian facilities.
Thank you. And finally, Madam Chair, just to understand around the equestrian community, as I understand one of their long-term aspirations, and I think it was brought to us last time they spoke to us in council, is around ensuring that they have safe overbridge access across the rail line. And it was a little bit difficult for me to understand from the report to what extent this will deliver that overbridge access for the equestririn community.
Excuse my lack of the program number knowledge, but there is an existing program it's within an existing program to consider an overbridge within the roading division's budgets. If I have this correct, and I believe that there's $1 million allocated for that, but it is going to seek Waka Kotahi subsidy. So its certainty revolves around Waka Kotahi's acceptance of that as a proposal within the cycling budgets. What was brought to my attention is that Waka Kotahi are unlikely to fund the increased level of service that equestrian facilities would require on the bridge. They might fund walking and cycling facilities, but equestrian facilities, if I understand it correctly, the bridge might need to be wider, the rails might need to be higher to protect the equestrian users and other users. So the suggestion from the officer I spoke to was that we investigate what the marginal cost of the additional equestrian facilities on the overbridge would be, and then we would be in a position to understand, and also design hasn't been done yet because the program is several years away. We'll be in a position to understand whether the $1 million is at about the right level or needs to be at a different level, and whether the equestrian facilities add significant costs and what those might be.
Thank you, Aaron. And finally, sections 210 and 211 kind of made some statements about land tenure, especially on the true left of the Pohongana, that I was left a little bit unclear on in terms of what the actual land tenure situation is there.
Apologies, a little bit seeing woods for trees when you write the report. Sometimes you don't understand that other people don't have the information you have. So on the true left bank, I just about have to hold up my hands to do my true lefts and rights for rivers. Our understanding at this point is that Waka Kotahi are proposing to retain ownership of the land that they acquired to build the haul road that runs from just past the Saddle Road Bridge back to the Te Ahua Tauranga highway / the new bridge. And that haul road might be available for public use where access to it provided. So it can be a little bit of a moving feast in terms of that land ownership, but that's what we understand they intend to do at this point. They don't intend to sell it.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. Much appreciated. Madam Chair.
Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Aaron. I think Councillor Barrett sort of teased out most of the questions. Just on page 24, and it's really around that rail overbridge over Pembroke, because we've had quite a few submissions around that from Ashurst community, but also the equestrian and horse riding community, which is quite large at Ashurst. You say it's marginal cost of achieving equestrian access. Any idea, and it's 2 years away, I understand, 2024, 25's budget. Any idea what that may be?
No, I couldn't tell you, unfortunately, Mr. Chair.
That's fine. That's me.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Aaron. I've just got a couple of questions. One just relates to the first attachment, which is the sort of satellite overview of the path network. So am I clear in understanding that option 2 is the white dotted line on that diagram?
Yes, apologies, probably not as legible as it could have been, but you're correct.
Okay, so option 2 then would link up with the start of the new shared path in Cambridge Avenue. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I need to put a caveat on that, councillors. If the Pembroke Overbridge proceeds within the roading budgets, it would.
Okay. So at the moment, the assumption there with the little red overbridge is that that would be coming in a couple of years with the other programme.
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. And do you have any sort of indication from Waka Kotahi as to whether they would view the more cautious option 2 differently to a proposal to do the whole loop? In other words, if we go with option 2 as per your recommendation, do you think that that has any lesser chance of being successful given that it doesn't do the whole loop?
I'd be speculating. I haven't had those conversations with them, councillor. I couldn't say. I guess my observation would be if we were looking to do the whole loop, excuse my stumbling, the major barrier of the Saddle Road Bridge would be a concern for me, and we would be using a far greater chunk of the overall fund, and whether or not that brings to light some of the concerns previously expressed by councillors and other questions about other groups and their access to the fund.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Aaron. Just a very quick question, just in terms of option 2 is that, like, there is a finite fund, obviously, for this project from Waka Kotahi. Do we have any feel for, like other TLAs may in fact actually dip into that, do we have a feel for whether or not that fund is likely to be oversubscribed?
We're confident that Tararua will be applying for what's called the Lindau Trail on the other side. I don't have a feel for Manawatu District, I believe, aren't intending to apply. We've approached them to support our proposal if you approve an application. So I think those are the 3 TLAs involved. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Aaron, for the report. I have a problem for my own understanding. On page 33, attachment 2, and the last column says maintenance cost 5,200 per kilometre per year. Is that amount total of all activities, or what's that 5,200?
My apologies, councillor. That was a reference point in the spreadsheet for calculating the operational costs of various sections of the path. So that is the average cost across council's pathway network for maintenance of walkways at the moment, rather than a total relating to this project. So the totals relating to this project were in the far right column. So if we're in the right, option 2 was $15,000 per year extra operational costs if you approve this project.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? Anyone online that I didn't see? Okay, so we're all clear. So thank you very much, Aaron. Right, we will now bring the recommendations up, and I'll change the figures on Erin's recommendation. So I'm changing the Recreation Path Fund to 551, and the figure underneath, the 456, will be changed to 491. So just checking our CFO, is that correct? We've done our maths correctly. Okay, do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Naylor, and thank you, the Deputy Mayor. So, Councillor Naylor, I'll let you speak first.
I'm really happy to support what's being proposed. I think this is a pragmatic way, and it makes a lot of sense for us to be able to access the external funding, so I'm really happy to support it.
Sorry, just before we move on, I just need to read those recommendations out. So, okay, so we'll share them on the screen so everybody's got them. So, but I will read them out for the people online. So, recommendation number 1 is that the Chief Executive is authorised to prepare a bid to the Waka Kotahi Te Ahu Aturanga Recreational Paths Fund on behalf of the Council. Recommendation 2, that the amount of the council bid to the Waka Kotahi Te Ahu Aturanga Recreational Paths Fund is $551,000, as described in option 2 of this report, and comprised of $491,000 to enhance the existing pathways on the Ashes side of the river, and $60,000 to investigate the options and costs of addressing pedestrian, cycling and equestrian safety on the Saddle Road Bridge and equestrian facilities on the Pembroke Street rail overbridge. Number 3 is that the council note the funding application reflects the initial estimate of the cost to construct the chosen option, and further investigation is required before an engineer's estimate can be prepared. And number 4 is that the Chief Executive report back to the Finance and Audit Committee on the outcome of the funding application, including any financial implications for consideration as part of the draft 23-24 annual budget process. So, the Deputy Mayor, I'll move to you if you wish to speak.
Oh, just a brief comment that I think this is a great opportunity. Ashurst is a growing community, and we've heard particularly in the past from a number of different users around cycle facilities, equestrian facilities, and we know that we want to do something to address some of the concerns, and I think this provides a pathway forward to addressing those. So, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity, and as Councillor Naylor said, a very pragmatic one, so very happy to support.
Thank you. And Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'm going to support the recommendations as well for all the reasons that my colleagues have alluded to. Option 2 is our best recommendation. We don't know the full costs of looking at the wider loop, and also the risk analysis probably hasn't been done. And put it simply, we cannot afford it at this stage. But it is possible we could be staged once we know all the facts and the costs, and the council's in a better position to program it and address it all. Option 2 still, if you look at page 31, still gives us great access to Te Apiti, the gorge and the domain. I don't know how many times I've had Ashurst, what do we call Ashurst people? Ashurstites? Yeah, Ashurst residents. The Deputy Mayor could probably help me there. But they come and they talk about getting access, walking access to the domain. And the Pembroke Street overbridge is absolutely necessary. It cannot happen without that. It's the missing link. So I would urge officers to put some real emphasis and energy on that. But also, if they could give options, and I understand the balance there around NZTA funding, of the pathway, the cycling and the pedestrian walking side, but also additional horse and equine access. We've had a number of, the Ashurst community has a large horse riding community, and we've had a lot of presentations, a lot of submissions in the past from them. So I think it'd be remiss if we didn't at least include the option of including them. So I think this is great for Ashurstites and Palmerstonians. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, I support option 2, and as others have said, it's a good opportunity. But I think it's worth saying that people in Ashurst have experienced quite a lot of inconvenience as a result of the Gorge Road closing, the diversion of traffic through Saddle Road and effectively through the village of Ashurst. And I think it would be appropriate for some of the Waka Kotahi money to go towards facilities in Ashurst. So I think it's almost, I see it a bit like a thank you to the Ashurst people for the inconvenience that they've put up with for so long. So I'm particularly supportive of putting this bid in for that reason. And the other thing is, I think it's very sensible not to go for the full loop with the complications of the Saddle Road Bridge at the moment. Things may well change once the new road opens, but at the moment it's not an either or. If we go for option 2, it still sets us up for being able to do the Three Bridges loop at a later date. So very supportive, and thank you to the officers for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, to thank officers for a lot of work behind the scenes to get things this far, and wish them well in finalising the bid and getting it in. Certainly, from my perspective, we need to have a long-term aim of getting that Three Bridges loop actually completed and working well for that community and for the wider community as a recreation destination. But I am comfortable with the effectively staged approach that we would be taking here with getting a better feasibility done. And I think, the Saddle Road's going to look just totally different once Te Ahuatoranga actually opens up, and I think it'll become a much more obvious part of a recreational asset at that point. I suppose, have some perspective on this, given that I was somewhat involved with the equestrian community during the notice of requirement hearings at the initiation of Te Ahuatoranga, which gave rise to a couple outcomes. One was a shared path from Ashurst to Woodville alongside the new road, and the other was its recreational fund. And the equestrian community was instrumental in achieving both of those outcomes. Since that time, Wakatahi has walked back the commitments around equestrian access on the shared path along the Ashurst to Woodville Road and left the equestrian community quite empty-handed. And I'm disappointed that Wakatahi has taken that approach, and disappointed to hear that they may continue to take that approach when looking at investments around equestrian access in and around Ashurst Village, because I do feel that it is inconsistent with the tenor of the discussions at the notice of requirement and the engagement that we had with Wakatahi at that stage. Having said all that, and griping a bit, I suppose, about where Wakatahi is getting to, as council, we need to make sure that part of the community is looked after, and I think that we need to ensure that we keep a close eye on that part of the provision in this loop, and ensure that people with horses, ponies, etc., can safely access and share space with others getting through the Ashurst area into the Ashurst domain, etc., and enjoying, at least in some part, the quality of access and enjoyment of the river and river adjacent zones that they had prior to Te Ahuatoranga actually showing up and quite radically modifying some of that landscape and access. So again, want to thank officers for the work and really look forward to hearing the outcome. Certainly hope that it is positive, because again, the recreational potential around Te Apiti is huge, and to see us be able to unlock that in some way with a Three Bridges loop over time is absolutely consistent with the sort of future we want to build for our city and communities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor, do you want to write? So that's all. So we will now go to vote. So all those in favour, we'll just wait till we get the people on the screen. So we're voting on the 4 recommendations together. So all those in favour, raise your hand. So that's everybody in the chamber. And anybody against? No, so that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item number 7, which is on page 37. And that's the quarterly performance and financial report, ending March 31st, 2022. And we have that presented by our Acting Chief Financial Officer, Cameron Mackay. And we have Andrew Boyle with Cameron, and he's our Head of Community Planning. So over to you, gentlemen, when you're ready.
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. Here to present the third quarter report, and largely take the report as read, but there are a few items and themes that just want to highlight. It does feel a little bit like a continuation of the discussions we've had previously through the year. This year has been impacted by COVID. And as a result, we are sitting on a $5.9 million surplus for the year. In terms of the COVID impact, we started off the year with a period of lockdown, which has impacted on our deliverability of our projects. And now that we see ourselves sort of progressing through COVID times, we're now experiencing a little bit of the impact of what illness has in terms of restrictions easing, but people becoming sick. So that's been a bit of a impact for us in this last little period of time. In addition to that, we have some emerging or continuation of some threads, particularly in the supply chain, where we do have materials and things coming in from overseas, particularly any materials that's coming in at the moment from China. China's experiencing its own lockdown, which is meaning that things sitting at the ports are unable to be shipped, and that's having an impact as well. So I just wanted to highlight that is something that we're trying to deal with. And I guess the follow-on of all of that is that means that we've made some assumptions that you'd be aware of in terms of the draft annual budget in terms of carry forwards. We haven't revised them just yet. We're working through that process, and of course keeping an eye on what's happening and what impacts they're going to have in that front, and we'll be bringing that back to you next month. I just want to highlight a couple of items in terms of budget variations. So you'll note that there is a recommendation around the low carbon fund budget. So the purpose of that budget is to provide an amount to go towards reducing our carbon emissions footprint, and we transfer that to other projects. Because of our delegations that we have in place, by nature of that means that we are required to bring back every adjustment out of that fund to other initiatives. And so we do have a recommendation there to help officers to be able to transfer out of that fund into other projects that meet that criteria. So it would be helpful in terms of being able to do that as projects progress for the officers. So just put that up there for your consideration. You'll note that we have put in the back of the report basically items under the delegations manual where we have movements between budgets as well as additional items under the Chief Executive approval. Probably the main item in there for 2 items in there for your consideration is that we have done a minor shuffle around in the DIA projects, and the purpose behind that, and that's for the Three Waters Fund for those. The main purpose behind that is to ensure that we can spend that fund within the time frame of 30 June, noting some of those supply challenges that I alluded to earlier. The other main item of adjustment is we are experiencing growth, in particular in terms of our planning for growth and residential and industrial development, and we have got a shift in the budget in that activity, which is also in that appendix. Andrew, is there anything you want to highlight in terms of performance measures? Happy to take questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll just start. Page 47, the asphalt plant that broke down, is that up and running yet? Or is that still causing us problems?
Chair, Sarah Sinclair, Chief Infrastructure Officer. Yes, Madam Chair, it is up and running, and Thornton Hogan have also started their own asphalt plant now, which we've been waiting for a while.
Oh, great, thank you. Right, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, gentlemen. Number of questions. You're talking about spending or completing the spend on the low carbon fund. What are the 2 programs? Specifically, they're listed as Victoria Esplanade and LED lighting. What exactly are they?
Sarah, okay, fighting over it. Thank you, Bryce.
Good morning, Bryce Hosking, Group Manager Property. I can talk about the LED side of things. So that was, we have a regular program to be slowly, incrementally replacing all of the LEDs in all of Council's facilities, and this allowed us to bring forward quite a bit of work, and we've managed to complete this building, do a whole bunch in Te Manawa, and we are progressively going through all of our public toilets and our community centres, replacing all the lights with LEDs.
So specifically, what is the increase in budget of 230,000? Where will that be spent?
In those facilities. So they were planned for outer years, and what we've managed to do is bring them forward into this year, okay, which will get us savings in outer years of the LTP.
Okay, so you got any idea? 230,000, where is it going to go?
I think it was about $100,000 in the community centres to replace all of those. It was about $70,000 throughout all of our public toilets. This building, I think we took 50, and that must be just about getting to the end of our number.
Okay, thank you. Just on the Victoria Esplanade, there's 115 extra spend there. Where's that going? What's that for?
Through the Chair, I'm sorry, we don't have Cathy this morning. We'll have to come back to you with that one. But again, it will be on things to decarbonise.
It's to help you. It's program 1847. Do you not know what that is?
No, that'll be Cathy, but she's not here. She's not able to make this meeting. So my apologies. We'll come back to you on that.
Okay. Okay. Madam Chair, just a couple more. When will the glass recycling restart? Probably getting a few of those questions.
Through the Chair, yes, we are. We're actually discussing that this morning. I came here from a 7:30 meeting where we were discussing exactly that. There's a couple of health and safety issues in terms of staff availability to work through, because we stopped it because we couldn't safely operate with the number of staff because of the illnesses. So we're discussing that at the moment. We are hopeful fingers crossed, and I hope to be able to bring you some good news soon.
Okay, just while you're up, Sarah, deliverability on projects is page 41. What's the latest with deferrals? What are we going to end up with capital new renewals in a couple of months' time?
Through the chair, Mr. Mayor, we are working through that again at the moment. As Cameron alluded to, we've been impacted again by delays out of Shanghai for some of the particularly steel work that we were relying on. So we're updating our forecasts at the moment for end of year to be clear on what we will be, what else will be impacted and what else will need to defer. Most of the things that are being impacted are already contracted. It's simply that our suppliers can't deliver them.
So what are we looking at, 50%, 60%, 70%?
No, because it varies across the different work programs. It's really, it's people specific, it's plant specific, it's material specific. So it's quite variable, and it also, as we've experienced COVID passing through our supply chain, the impact that's had is that it's knocked out individual teams at a time. You'll remember when Sandra was presenting at the Infrastructure Committee, she said that we'd lost an asphalt team because they'd lost so many people they couldn't operate safely. So it's really impacting everything on a literally project by project basis.
So will we get that information at some stage, because we have to make some major decisions on
I know, so we're working really hard, the team's working really hard to try and get that information to you through the annual planning process, because we know that it will impact the decisions you're making. I know that we talk about this being an unprecedented time, but it is such an unprecedented time in terms of that unpredictability of what else will be impacted. So, and you know our own team has been impacted by COVID, but everyone's working really hard. You know, budgets are front of mind for us to make sure that we're giving you good advice.
I look forward to it. Just on vacancies, staff vacancies, where are we currently sitting at the moment? Does anybody know?
Through the chair, Wayne Wilson, acting Chief People Officer. Around very similar to previous, around that 135, 140 mark.
Okay, thank you. Just one more final question, Madam Chair. Again, under financial on page 41, is around the Te Uranga, the Streets for People project. What's the current status of that at the moment?
There's two different Streets for People programs at the moment. One is the Wakatahi Streets for People, where we're trying to get some more funding out of them, which we'll talk to you about shortly. The main Streets for People program, we are we came to you before Christmas to talk about negotiation of well, maybe not an early start. The negotiations are ongoing. The design, the detailed design is pretty much 90% complete. We're going through sign-offs at the moment. Again, just to part of what we've gone, we're doing early contractor involvement to try and deal with some of those early planning issues about material ordering. So we've looked at some of the materials already in terms of what we can get in the country versus what we need to order overseas. But that's a discussion that's ongoing at the moment about the early ordering of things to try and get us over the supply chain difficulties that we're having with importing.
So in simple terms, Sarah, are plans done? Are tenders ready? Has it been tendered? Or are we not, are we not far away?
So the plans are done with 90 to 95%. We've just got a couple more sign-offs to make sure that it runs through our own internal owner processes properly. The tenders are drafted. We discuss through an early contractor involvement process. So we're discussing with a tenderer the tender and how to get that, how to get some of the materials ordered early. We'll come back to you with the results of the tender process probably in July.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had some questions on Three Waters, and I guess in terms of the financial consequences of the Three Waters transition, and looking at the balance sheet that's presented in the report, I'd be interested to understand what would come out of the close to $2 billion of council assets and the equity, and how that will also impact revenue and what the consequences of that are on forward debt funding and debt capacity. So I wondered if perhaps Cameron, you could comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Armstrong, through you, Madam Chair. That is going to be quite a large piece of work for us to undertake. Some of the work will be relatively straightforward to understand because it's directly related to the Three Waters activity. But we also have some areas that the overhead aspects as well that we need to then understand better to understand how much would come out, so to speak, if Three Waters go through. So no, we haven't done a detailed exercise on that. It is forefront of mind that is going to happen, and certainly in terms of our future planning, and when we think about our long-term plan and the issues identified through there, that certainty of knowing Three Waters are going to transition is something that we are keeping a very watchful eye on, because it impacts our overall debt, particularly our debt portfolio, which is the area in which Audit New Zealand had an issue in the long-term plan with.
So just then broadly, Cameron, I mean, just as a range finder for me, I mean, in terms of to the nearest 100 million, what component of that $2 billion or so of assets does the Three Waters component actually, how much is that broadly?
I couldn't answer that off the top of my head, but I could get an answer back to you pretty quickly, I would think.
Okay. Look, okay, so that piece of work is underway, I guess, because my second question is perhaps less around the financial consequence, debt capacity, shape of the balance sheet, but more just around, and I appreciate that it's 2024, but it's going to be quite a massive transition, and I'm sure there are some significant risks. So I'm just interested in how management are thinking about the change program, the resources that will be required to ensure this transition, if it goes ahead, will work, and just what are the boundaries and how are you thinking about addressing that issue?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think I'd divert some of that question to Sarah Sinclair, Chief Infrastructure Officer, because part of some of the work that she's done in terms of her team this year has been in preparation of that transition to ensure that we manage almost the resource risk associated with that. But I'll defer to Sarah if she's got any further comment to that.
Sarah, over to you.
Chair. So yes, Thank you for the question, Mr. Armstrong. I think that we've been doing quite a lot to clarify structures so that our staff are clearly working on either water or non-water, so that we can prepare for transition in that way. We've been, part of what the staff are doing is getting involved in the DIA working groups. Cameron's right that the structure of the new entities isn't understood yet. How they'll work their overheads, and therefore what supporting functions they'll do and all of that, it isn't clear to us. So the work that we're doing, one, is engaging with them across the board on every working group we're offering to participate. We're continuing to talk to them both through the funding they're already giving us and on a general basis as liaison with the new setup, and to make sure that we're keeping staff aware of the discussions that we're having and the progress that's being made. But we have changed our structures. We've particularly changed the structures to separate out the water delivery teams in the CAB and to amalgamate the water maintenance and water delivery teams at the depot, so that we can more clearly identify and manage budgets and work programs that are solely water related.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And then my last question is on.
Cameron just wants to follow on.
Yes. So, sorry, Mr. Armstrong. I just wanted to answer your prior question, particularly around the amount of assets out of that 2 billion that we have. So 600 million relates to the Three Waters activity.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. And then moving on to my last question was really around the suspended ERP project, and I just wanted an update on that, and also these sorts of projects, when you get these unconscionable delays that we've faced and the difficulties, I guess the risks of getting engagement, buy-in and understanding of the project is much higher. So I'd like to sort of understand how management are thinking about the project and how they're managing the risk associated with this delay.
Pass to our acting CE, Chris Doberg.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, for the question. We are booking a briefing on this topic. It will. I don't think we've got a date for it, but it will be coming up soon. We'll be able to provide a fuller sort of outline of all the issues and plan going forward. What I can say at this point is that we are, working quite hard at the moment in terms of looking at a mobilisation plan for the project to take it forward.
Okay, so it's top of mind.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's me.
Thank you. Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. Sorry to go back to you, Sarah. Just to follow up on the questions that the Mayor asked about the glass recycling. How many complaints have we received to date on not being able to pick up the glassware, and how we manage that complaint? What communication have we been putting out for that?
Bryce Hosking, Acting Group Manager of Resource Recovery in this case. Look, there's been plenty of, I guess it comes down to the definition of complaint. There has been obviously plenty of discussion online about this. We have received a number of calls about this as well, and they're being triaged and answered, so every one of those has been replied to. There's been regular comms through our Facebook page as well as on our website, basically just continually advising people of the situation, and also any sort of changes from there. Should what we're attempting to get over the line with the health and safety and come over the line then this week, hopefully, we'll be looking to advise people accordingly of when that will be kicking back off again.
So second follow-up question on that, has our volume of glass collection gone up at the depot? So have people been bringing it into the depot themselves?
We have seen an increase through the Ferguson Street site.
Have we got a percentage that it's gone up by?
I don't off the top of my head know, but there has been a considerable increase through the depot site, and that's been continually managed and worked through there. So yeah, pleasingly there has been an increase there. A very small one at our Awapuni drop-off site and a very small one at the Ashurst, over and above regular levels, but definitely Ferguson Street has seen
It'd be good to get some
reasonable
metrics
increase.
on the complaints so we can know how many complaints have come through over this process. My
Happy to do
second
that.
question is around the revenue, not for you, Bryce, I don't know who this is for, but the revenue drop-off for the convention centre and arena, I just want to know if we can get a percentage of how much revenue we are down on both those facilities, Cameron.
I don't have that level of detail on me, but I can ask a member of the team and get back to you as soon as possible.
Cameron, sorry to interrupt, but Kerry Lee's online if she would like to answer that. Here she comes. Over to you, Kerry Lee. Did you manage to hear the question?
I did, thank you, but unfortunately I also don't have that information to hand, but can certainly make it available to you as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, next up for questions, we have Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions from me. The first one is around, on page 46, the delay to the consent application for the wastewater treatment plant. And I see there's a note that says consent application extended to December 2022. I just want to check that that has been granted by Horizons, who I think are the consenting authority.
Sarah?
Through the chair, yes, thank you, Councillor Johnson, and we will be bringing a paper to you shortly as council with the detail of that. But yes, we wrote to Horizons and said given the fact that the initial submission was delayed by 3 months and that we are working through a period of time when we have significant COVID impacts through our workforce and through the supply chain, we won't be able to submit the consent until December, and Horizons have written back and acknowledged that, given that we are working towards a consent with goodwill and with all of our stakeholders, they acknowledge that we won't put the consent in before then, and they won't pursue us to put the consent in before then.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is on page 56, around the fact that we've slipped into the red on the land rezoning and infrastructure to meet growth demand. And I just want to know how much or what exactly we're going to need to do to meet that KPI. There's a whole list of projects that are planned in the comment, but I'm not clear how far off it we are or what particular action could be taken to get that back into the normal KPI range.
I'll ask David to answer that question.
Morena Koto, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. So in the sort of medium to long term, those big projects that we're working on in terms of Kotiri and Kakatangiata will resolve those or that KPI. But in the more short term, we have some smaller developments such as Whiskey Creek, Roxburgh Crescent, Huia Street, Summerhays, and some smaller sites which we're looking to rezone, which will resolve that in the short to medium term. But as I said, the medium to long term, it's those big plan changes that will resolve that.
Okay, so when would you be able to anticipate that we would be meeting those targets by?
Well, certainly Whiskey Creek is scheduled for a hearing, so that will provide another 160 sections. So I would have to go back and just check with the team exactly in terms of the numbers and how far behind we are relative to that measure. But as I said, there's a big work program ahead to resolve those issues.
Okay, well, that would be helpful if you can provide that to us after the meeting. Thanks.
Any further
Thanks,
questions? Okay, thank
No,
you.
thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanting to start with page 100. I've got a few questions here, by the way. The variations to the budget, Cameron, in your introduction, you mentioned that transfer of the 660,000, and that's shown on page 100 have been transferred into the governance and active citizenship area to support urban growth work program. And I'm just wondering why has that not been added to the city growth bucket? Why it doesn't seem logical to me for it to go into governance and active citizenship.
Through you, Madam Chair, I would just have to double check with the team to just ensure that my understanding of the activity composition is correct, and I'll come back to you.
Okay, because I think following the last finance meeting, one of the questions I had was, I think there was about a 400,000 overspend in the governance and active citizenship area, and when the councillor help response came back, it indicated that overspend was around city growth programs. Yeah, so it'd just be good to get that understanding at some point. So the next question is page 101, the FTE count across council. I think the Mayor's already asked a question that related to this. Now, the bar graph, the difference between the 622 and the 687 FTE, that's 65. I would have thought that meant there were 65 vacancies, but in an answer to the Mayor's question, Mr Wilson said that there was about 140. So I'm just trying to understand the discrepancy there in that information.
Wayne Wilson.
Yeah, no, I'm assuming that that's, sorry, and I'm not 100% sure here. I'm assuming the 687 is if we had all of our vacancies, including all of the temps and casuals, part-time and casuals in place. But I just need to go back and work out what the 687 actually does refer to. And I'm looking at, I'm looking at Cameron, but not 100% on that one.
Yeah, I'd have to follow up with the team on that one.
We'll come back to you on that one.
Okay.
So, sorry, can I just, so the actual graph is the FTE, so that's full-time effective units, so I'm assuming that 687 is full-time. So it would be the difference, what the council is asking is the difference between that and her 100 and whatever it was.
Yeah. The
100, yeah.
The 622 includes all of those, that includes all part-time employees and casual employees. So that's a number of hours that were worked that week. So we work that out on a 40-hour week and determine how many FTEs there are. That doesn't directly relate to the number of people as such. That's there. Yeah.
Okay, so to get perhaps a more comprehensive picture of that, would it be, I'm suggesting it would be helpful to have that figure shown so that we can actually see the number of vacancies. Is that able to be added to that for future reporting, or would we need to specifically request it? It could be added? Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Thank you. Just moving to page 97, which we have 95 it is. So we have the updated of that on our table. the correct version. So just looking at the employee remuneration part of that, under the first line under expenses, we're $1 million surplus, I see, which has shrunk. I think last time we had a quarterly report, it was about a 1.6 million surplus, so that surplus seems to be shrinking. And just working out from the 52.5 million, what I would have expected to be spent in a quarter, so a quarter of that, we've actually spent in this last quarter more than a quarter of the overall budget for the year. And so I guess my question around that is trying to align that with the previous question that we just asked around FTE, with the number of vacancies that have been indicated somewhere between 65 and 140 in the organisation. Why would we be spending all of our remuneration budget whilst we are carrying that level of vacancies?
Through you, Madam Chair. So this employee remuneration includes, also includes within there any on contract temporary staff that we may have hired to backfill some of those vacant positions, and also included in there is if we've had any staff who have left the organisation and potentially had employee entitlements paid as part of leaving the organisation. So sometimes you will have some fluctuations due to that effect.
Okay, so do we budget for the full FTE that's in our annual plan?
We have a vacancy factor that we do apply. It is a calculation that is at the moment probably on the light side compared to what we're experiencing in terms of vacancies. That's why we're having a favourable variance in employee expenses, but we don't budget for 100% full vacancy. We do allow for a little bit of acknowledgement that there are going to be positions that are vacant at points through the year.
Okay, just to follow on this, so if we were to fill quite a lot of our vacancies in the coming weeks, would we have an issue with a big overspend in the remuneration budget?
I don't see that we would have I don't think we would have an issue, Councillor, no.
Okay, even though we've spent more than a quarter of the remuneration budget in the last 3 months?
Yes, because staff that we've got in on contract, for example, I would anticipate would be being replaced with more permanent staff at full-time rates as opposed to contract rates.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to through the annual budget process, we were made aware that 7 million of the salary budget relates to capitalised salary that is to deliver, contribute towards delivering the capital program. Given where the delivery of our capital program is at, which obviously for all very good reason, I think we're at about a third delivery of our capital new, for example, for the year so far. So if we get to the end of the year and perhaps have only delivered a half or around a half of our capital program, or whatever it ends up to be, do we still end up incurring $7 million debt towards those salaries, even if we haven't delivered the programs that those salaries are established to deliver?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's an area where there are a number of assumptions assumed in the question. So that would assume that we would be fully resourced in the capital delivery space, which we are not, and it would also assume that in terms of 7 million debt, that would assume that all of that staff is for capital new programs, whereas it'll be a mixture across delivering the capital new and the renewal program. So it's not one that you can give a simple answer. There's a number of complexities and depends on where the vacancies in the organisation are.
And so is that component tracked in an operational way?
We would have some way of being able to show that, I would think. I'd have to check with the team.
And is that reported to us in any sort of way, that to give us some sort of indication of how much debt we're incurring for the capital program delivery?
I can go back to the team and check on the level of detail that can be pulled up at, and potentially provide a response to the council.
Thank you. And just the final area that I had a question was around the Streets for People program on page 82, and some questions have already been answered in response to the Mayor's questions on that. Now, the answer from Sarah was that we would probably see something in terms of a tender process in July, which is obviously the next financial year. So am I understanding correctly that all the components of Program 2122 that relate to actual construction, that wouldn't be likely to happen till the next financial year?
Chair, in the main, but part of what we're looking at with our supply chain stuff because of COVID is whether we can order materials early. So we might be ordering some materials this year, this financial year, to help the delivery process. So I can't guarantee to you at the moment that we'll carry it all over, because we might need to order some materials early.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking this question is that I'm really wanting to understand what the process is in terms of how elected members can give any sort of direction around prioritisation of capital programs that won't be delivered in the current financial year. I mean, obviously, if they're carried forward, that can be considered as part of the 22-23 annual budget deliberations. In a case like this, where it sort of rolls over 2 years, the planning is done in 1 year, but perhaps the construction is done next year, if elected members wanted to give direction to defer a program such as that one, what would be the best process so that if that was to happen, if elected members supported perhaps the deferral of a program like that, what would the best way for elected members to give that direction so that money wasn't wasted on buying stuff unnecessarily? Sorry, that's a bit of a loaded question, but I think it's important because, you know, we're being told that we won't have an update on the carry forwards till next month.
Through the chair, so the last time we brought Cuba Street to you for decision making was Christmas, just before Christmas.
I'm not talking about Cuba Street, I'm talking about...
Oh, sorry, not Cuba Street. Streets for People was also, I believe, just before Christmas in terms of that negotiated next steps. To change now, I think it would be a notice of motion, because you're right, until we give you more information through the annual plan process, what is in train will continue to be in train.
Okay.
Just to follow on from that, can I just get clarity? Because all our programs have been voted through by council through the annual plan and 10-year plan process. So any change to that plan would have to come through the chamber, because it's got to be a collective decision. So that would have to be come through a notice of motion if a particular councillor wants to change any of those programs. So I just would like to have clarity on that. I'm clarifying that, sorry. So
yes, and I fully understand that from the officer's response. That makes sense. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, have you finished, councillor? Thank you. Now we'll go back online. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions relate to the recommendations around Program 1888, the low carbon fund, and transfers out of that fund. What's in place to ensure ongoing rigor of the analysis and ongoing line of sight around the primary purpose of this fund, which is managing down council's emissions by taking this new approach?
David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. So we plan to report annually to the Environmental Sustainability Committee on the way in which this fund is operated on a year-to-year basis. And of course, as you know, we're also monitoring our organisational emissions on an annual basis.
Thank you. Further to that, can I understand what analysis has already been done around this particular case? So I guess my point of reference for that question is that the last time we were asked to make adjustments to the fund, we were presented with data around the net present value calculations as well as the expected emissions savings. And I'm looking now at a situation where what we're doing is really accelerating some things that were already in the pipeline, and so would want to have some assurance that we've done the analysis around the expected emission savings and that analysis is cognizant that we're just looking at an acceleration rather than a new direction.
I can confirm that analysis, I don't have the details on hand, but I can confirm that analysis is occurring for each of the transitions of the budget from the low carbon fund.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before I go to the next question, I'll just go to Kerry Lee. She now has an answer to Councillor Hapeta's question around venues. So over to you, Kerry Lee.
Thank you. Through the chair, information has been provided by the team that around 14% in the arena and around 33% in the conference and function centre against year-to-date budget. So between the two, we're about 19% below on revenue to the end of March. So that equates to about 420,000 K.
Thank you. And just to clarify, that was 1414.
1414, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Are you okay with that, Councillor Hapeta? Thank you, Kerry Lee. Now I'll move on to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my question might be for the Chief Executive, who might answer it or might delegate a response. Just in terms of the pressures on staff at the moment, my question's twofold. So I'm wondering what the organisation is doing to alleviate those, both in terms of staff being able to actually complete work, so whether we're bringing in consultants or additional resource, and I guess also what we're doing in terms of supporting the well-being of our staff who are also under a lot of pressure.
Thank you for the question, Deputy Mayor. A good question. So I think you've touched on part of the answer already. So as we've seen in the discussion around employee costs, that they seem to be quite high, and again that is because across a number of areas we have to go to consultants to get the work done. As an example, planning and building, particularly those costs are quite high, often offset to some extent by remuneration costs. So that's probably the big issue. I think more to the point at the moment is that our inability, we can't actually even go to the market for some things. There's just, the resources tapped out. So at the moment, I suppose one strategy we have to do is to be really clear with people about being ruthless about prioritisation around what we can do. Now, I suppose the flip side to that is we try and be, transparent about what is on hold versus, what is going forward. So that's probably, I think that's probably the best lever we've got. I suppose, if you look at the, non-financial reporting, I'm sort of somewhat surprised at actually how green it is. When I look at the lack of resources and the issues in relation to staff, the fact that we've been able to maintain service levels to the point we have, to be honest, it worries me, because it worries me what our people are doing to maintain those service levels when we know we've got the high levels of vacancies, staff away sick. It's been particularly been a particular issue in the infrastructure team, and I think at the moment, I know there's a lot of frustration at times with people not getting answers to questions around what's happening here, people not seeing work being done, but the reality is we're just often operating to up to 20% of our people away. They're often the key people that, we need to answer questions and do work. We're seeing the same issues in our contractors, particularly the civil construction contractors. At times their absence rates have been ridiculously high, where they got to the point where they literally can't do anything. So it is a big issue at the moment. I suppose in terms of what we're doing around staff welfare is, I suppose as leaders of the organisation, the best thing we can do is to reassure our people, if you are sick, stay home. We've sent really clear messages about we see too many people on a Teams call working where clearly they're ill with COVID, but for some reason they feel the need to step in. So that's probably the key thing, is constant messaging around, number one priority has to be the support of our staff and their welfare, and basically, delivery and maintenance of service levels has to come next. And you've seen it in things, not being able to pick up the glass and what have you. And I suppose it's quite disappointing at times, how much of a kicking we do get when, there are issues that we literally have no control over, and, and the only other way is to ignore staff welfare. So probably my sort of key message to everyone is just to recognise that's still an issue. Yes, we are probably starting to get on the other side of the hump, and hopefully things will get back to normal. But, issues around supply chains, not being able to hire staff, they are not going away, and it is probably the top of my worry list.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I thought I was back in the queue there, but it seems somehow I got missed. Couple. And the Three Waters reform, and probably to you, Sarah, the remaining 19% of work, I'm not sure if you did cover it off, I don't know, 1.9 million or whatever it is. Will that be completed by the 30th of June?
Chair, with every caveat about COVID, that's why we moved the budgets around, so that we can deliver it by the 30th of June.
Okay, thank you. Infrastructure on page 54 of our report, progress around the infrastructure of a residential growth, specifically Tamakuku. How is that going? I went for a drive up there at the weekend, and it says here it's going to be completed in the coming weeks. Is that all on track?
As of Friday last week, stage 1 is still on track to be completed in June of Tamakuku, and then stage 2 we're still working through the more wider consenting issue. So no change there.
And sales progress?
We are finding it considerably more difficult than it was earlier in the year, is probably a nice way to put it. We are working pretty closely with Bailey's, who we've engaged to help us from a sales side of things, working directly with things like group builders to be working through some options, and we've also gone down the track of working with a designer to come up with some options for some of the smaller sections and what some ideal outcomes could be from a housing perspective, which have been received pretty positively from a number of banks, potential purchasers, but also the group builders who are also looking to price those up and do things like that. So we're trying plenty of things at the moment, but the financial constraints of lending is definitely proving to be a pretty common theme when dealing with the general public.
So we'll get a report, will we, at some stage?
The next 6-monthly update is due to be presented to the Infrastructure Committee in June.
Okay, good. Just while I've got you there, I'm not sure if it's you or Sarah, our citywide stormwater, has the council got a global stormwater consent?
Through the chair, we'll come back to you on that one. For Whakarongo itself, we have chased that again with Horizons, if that was going to be one of your questions. But
I know it's just everywhere. I mean, it's a common thing into my office, and obviously to you as officers, is the hold up around stormwater consents. And just have we got a global consent that allows that to happen, as other TAs have got?
Well, we'll get back to you. My understanding was we were working towards it, but I don't think we do have one.
Okay.
But we'll get back to you.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor. Right, just checking there's no further questions. There being none, thank you very much, gentlemen. You may step down. Right, I will now move the 4 recommendations on page 37.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Was somebody coming back to us around what that, I mean, other questions got answered, mine didn't, just around that Capital New Program 1847, around Victoria Esplanade? Nobody seemed to know what it was for.
That will come back when they've got the info. Have you got that?
Through the chair, it was for a boiler that was installed in the Esplanade. Kathy's in an interview at the moment, so the details of where the boiler was, we'll have to wait until Kathy comes back out of the interview.
Okay, so that'll come back to you, Mr Mayor. We'll make sure.
Yeah, but it affects making a decision in a moment. That's all. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Right, we'll go to the 4 recommendations. So the first recommendation is that the committee receive the memorandum titled Quarterly Performance and Financial Report, quarter ending 31st of March 2022, presented to the Finance and Audit Committee 27th of April 2022. Number 2 is that Council note and approve that the capital expenditure and associated revenue values in the 2021-22 long-term plan budget relating to the 3 water reform funding will be changed as per the details in Appendix 4 of this report. Number 3, that Program 1888 low carbon fund budget be reduced by 345,000 and Program 1847 City Growth, City Reserves Victoria Esplanade Capital New Budget be increased by 115,000 and Program 1451 Property LED Lighting Upgrades be budget increased by 230,000. That the Chief Executive be given delegation to allocate 100% of funds from Program 1888 Low Carbon Fund to other activities, as well as moving the fund between Capital New and Capital Renewal for the financial year 21-22. So I'm happy to move those, and Councillor Naylor seconded. Mr Mayor.
Could they be separated, please?
Yes, certainly. So we'll take... Is everybody happy if we take the 3 items together except item number 3? Is everybody okay with that? Okay. So we'll do item number 3 first, but we will now go to comment on all items together, and then we'll come back and vote for item number 3 separately. So I'm happy to comment first. Thank you very much to the staff presenting this report. I know that we're going through a lot of tough times, and many staff members with sickness are wearing multiple hats. The fact that we've got a $5.9 million budget surplus doesn't mean to say that we've actually got $5.9 million of money that we can spend. We are going through really hard times with material increases, interest rate increases, salary increases, and just the general inflation. And I just remind councillors that all this work that defers, that $5.9 million surplus could end up with a $10 million deficit next time round when we start to have the staffing to do those projects and the resources. I mean, we've seen how bad inflation is in some of these projects, so we're just going to have to tread very, very carefully and I do compliment the staff on what they have been doing and trying to deliver on some of these projects, and I feel their pain and a lot of a lot of talking with the staff, so I really do thank you for the times that you're in and the work that you've been doing. There was comments made about the, we should have surplus in staffing, but I will remind you that when we're doing backfilling, when you're replacing with temps and contractors, it's significantly higher cost than when you've got your own staffing. So that's where a lot of those increased costs happen. I just would like to comment on the low carbon fund budget. I'm comfortable to support that. And that is not an increase in funding. It's just moving funds from that low carbon fund to actual projects. And I'd just like to remind councillors that if we don't do that before the 20th of June, we will lose the opportunities to use some of that money. So I know I'd like a little bit more explanation regarding the Victoria Esplanade, but I hear the word boiler and I know how big an impact that is on our environment. So I'm comfortable that if we're spending money on to upgrade the boiler or replace or whatever you're doing there, I'm comfortable with that that new money of that $115,000 going to that project. So I'll now hand it over to you. Sorry? Yes, actually, that's a good time. Actually, I will allow Kathy Diva-Todd to come in because I know that could. So, Kathy will. I know this is not normal, but because you weren't here, Kathy. So over to you, just on that item, please.
So could I just? I wasn't here to hear the question. The question was, what is the money for?
Yes, the $115,000 for the Victoria Esplanade budget increase. Which was program, hang on, just got program 1451. So what is actually that money to be used for? It was mentioned there, it was a boiler.
So that the money is a transfer from the carbon fund. The money is to be used to replace the current gas boiler, which heats the conservatory, with a pellet boiler. So the system in the conservatory is that hot water moves through the beds that the plants are in, and so we do need to replace it with a boiler. That reduces our dependence in the Esplanade on gas and has a lower carbon footprint. It also provides us some ongoing operational savings in the fuel costs.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. So, Mr Mayor, did you want to ask a question? I'll allow
Was
it.
that not in the first round of the low carbon fund?
It was in the first round that came to council, but needed to be an adjustment because the carbon fund was capital new and it needed to be moved into a renewals budget.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kathy. So we will go back to comments. No further questions, just comments. So I'll move now to Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of all of these recommendations, and as the Chair's already outlined, that third recommendation is a simple transfer, and I think that is in line with the purpose of that low carbon fund. And so I also support the fourth recommendation, which actually delegates the Chief Executive the ability to transfer those funds between the low carbon fund in a time such as this. You know, if it aligns with the purpose of that fund, I think it makes a lot of sense for it to be able to be transferred and applied to programs that are already in our budget, but obviously to enable reduce carbon. So just in response to the broader report, obviously, these are very difficult times, and I just want to acknowledge the incredible work that is happening across the organisation by staff who are obviously, often compromised with the current COVID situation. And so the delivery of the program, operational and capital, is significantly compromised in this financial year, and I acknowledge that, and that's no fault or of anyone in particular. It does mean that we need to respond to those changes. And you know, the Chief Executive has acknowledged that they're needing to be ruthless about prioritisation. I guess what I would like to acknowledge is that it's actually important for us as elected members to also have the conversation about when and where our is appropriate for us to be involved in helping direct that prioritisation. And certainly where things are carried forward into the next annual budget, it's very straightforward. We can actually consider carry forward programs as a part of our prioritisation and a part of our annual budget deliberations. Where it's a little bit more complex, and I've alluded to this in my questions, are where there are significant programs that have been approved for the current financial year that aren't going to be able to be delivered in the current financial year and need to be carried forward. And when that is the situation, those programs need to be considered in the current environment. We're in a very different situation and environment now than we were a year ago when some of those programs were considered and included in this year's budget. Now that we know that we're not able to deliver a large portion of our capital program, I think it's appropriate for us to look at how we might be able to influence the prioritisation of what does get done and what doesn't get done. And I'm not proposing to move any motion today, but I would like to put it out there that I think that there are some programs that would be extremely unwise of us to progress at the moment. And Streets for People is one of those. If you can just imagine how bad a look it would be for us to start construction in July of this year in the middle of winter, at the same time that many people in our community are hit with potentially a 20 or 30% rates rise, how that would impact the retailers, the perception of how that would look when many people in our community have indicated that they don't see that as a priority. My personal view is that that is one program that I think we should consider whether we give different direction to what has been agreed in the current annual budget. And I'm interested in hearing thoughts in coming weeks from others about that. I think it's something we should consider to test the waters to say, is this something that's wise for us to progress right now? Personally, I think it would be a very unwise move to progress that. And for the sake of officers being able to plan appropriately, I think it would be better for us to be able to indicate that prior to, as early as possible in the piece. Obviously, the officers' perspective of carry forwards will be, we won't see those for another month. We won't see those till May when we're deliberating the annual budget. And certainly, maybe that is soon enough for us to be able to have all the information we need to be able to make a well-informed decision. But I just wanted to put those comments out there. I do think this is a different year, and I think we need to think carefully about how we prioritise what gets done and what doesn't get done, and what we do with some of those programs that can't actually be implemented in this financial year. Just the other thing, I think it is really important for us to be able to have a good understanding of the vacancies in the organisation, and certainly it's pleasing to see from the reporting in this report from 3 months ago, the last quarterly report, where the vacancies were shown as 85, that's reduced to 65. I understand from the answers to questions that there's a little bit more of complexity around the actual vacancies that are still outstanding. And certainly I think with some strengthened reporting, I think it would be good for us to have a better understanding of that going forward and how that's trending, because certainly that does have an impact on the financials when we're having to outsource staff. That is a more expensive way of providing resource to the organisation than employing people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of brief comments. The first one is that I just really want to acknowledge staff and the effort and commitment to trying to keep things going that has come in across the board from all departments over the last few months. I think we do want to give the message to staff that, you know, we've got your backs. we understand that it's very, very tough at the moment. It's not just about people off sick and isolating, it's all of the other impacts of COVID around supply chain, around the labour market and so on. So I think it's very important that we give the message today that we are extremely appreciative of what staff are doing in exceptionally difficult circumstances. And so I want to make that extremely clear as the first comment. The other comment I wanted to make is that I think as elected members, we need to be realistic about what can be achieved in the current environment. Realistic in terms of our expectations, but also realistic in terms of planning. And I somewhat agree with some of the comments that Councillor Naylor made about looking forward, about thinking about what we can achieve, and being quite pragmatic in terms of what we plan to do and what we don't plan to do. But I do think there is a sense of frustration coming across today from some elected members. And whilst I understand that, I think it's important that we are understanding of the very difficult environment that staff are continuing to deliver some exceptionally good outcomes in. And so congratulations to all for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of brief comments from me as well. Mine is also to say well done to the staff during this really tough time. And I know that the Acting Chief Executive has managed the staff very well with your general managers, and I just want to say thank you to you. And I really appreciated your message that you said to the Deputy Mayor. We really acknowledge that. It has been tough during these particularly last month and the month before, so thank you for your work that you have done. I do think that when we do communicate to our community, we shouldn't just rely on social media, because not all of our community is on social media. So that is one medium, and we do have other mediums that we should be relying on, because a lot of our community don't just have that. So that's one thing I just want to say when we communicate. The second thing I just wanted to say was with the convention centre and with Arena, I do appreciate those figures that we got from Kerry Lee, but could we have more visibility over those two large venues, because we don't have any, we've not reported on them before, and if we could have a regular report to this committee every quarter, because they are our two prime venues, and we just want to see what's happening in terms of the financials, the staffing and the R&M, because they are our key starships, and we want to see them shine. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to add, or I guess support some of the other comments, but 2 points that I wanted to comment on was the first that I guess reading this report, I didn't see any huge surprises, and just want to acknowledge particularly the comms that have been coming out to elected members in the last few months. Probably also acknowledging that we're going through the annual budget, and so some of that has been coming through there. But I guess, you know, there was an additional level of detail that we hadn't had, but in terms of the big picture stuff, we had been prepped well to expect, you know, the figures that came through. So just want to acknowledge that, because we do appreciate being kept in the loop with what's going on outside of the quarterly reports. And the second is, I guess following up on the questions that I asked the Chief Executive, was just to acknowledge the staff pressures, as others have, and acknowledge the work that has been done. I guess I do hold a concern that we do have a real risk of our staff burning out, and I think, you know, that's kind of seems to be the trajectory that some areas are heading, and if we reach that point, then actually the ability to complete work in the areas that we can actually complete it in decreases even further. And so I do want to acknowledge that I appreciate staff are doing their best, but I would also hope that they would not see elected members kind of cracking the whip unnecessarily, when actually the primary focus, as the Chief Executive acknowledged, is our staff well-being, because if we don't have staff, we're not doing anything. And so just to acknowledge that that does remain a concern, and yeah, I thank the staff for the work that has been done to date. It's a very difficult environment at the moment.
Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too, just following on from some other comments, firstly, want to thank the acting CE, the management team, and the wider council staff, especially those on the front line. I mean, it's clear just getting through BAU, business as usual, is pretty tough. So I think the key findings from this report is we really should be focusing on what we can realistically and transparently do. What can we achieve? Times have changed quite quickly. I think it was Councillor Naylor said it was probably a year, it was different from a year. I think it's actually different from 3 months ago. And it doesn't seem to be heading in the best direction for us. We're going into an annual plan hearings and debates. We've got pending draft double-digit rate increases, significant rate increases. I don't think I've ever seen it like it has been in present times. Some of that's in our control, some of it isn't in our control. From this report, you know, we've got 140 vacancies. That's significant. And it does affect the organisation and how people are working. Some are working really, really hard, and again, we appreciate that. I mean, I know how hard I'm working and my colleagues are working, and you're probably doing more, so it's significant. We're in the perfect storm. We're price taking, we've got inflation going through the roof, probably to go further, supply chain issues, chuck in COVID, contractor availability, it's pretty tough. So I think for the wider council team, I would strongly advise officers and my council colleagues that we should be focusing on what we can achieve, not what ambition could look like. I think that's a discussion for another year perhaps. But prioritisation is definitely needed as we go forward. And I would hate to think that we're just going to box on with what we've got, because we are not achieving it now. So my message is please have a good look at that. On recommendation 3, thank you for the extra information, and that's changed my opinion on what I was going to do. But I just would say there needs to be a little bit more information on what you're doing there, moving budgets round, and we had to wait for an officer to get into the room to be able to really explain what was happening. So again, to the officers, a little bit more information, doesn't need to be a lot. I mean, even Councillor Barrett, who's a real champion of this fund, needed to ask some quite leading questions about where these budgets were being put and what the benefits were, because they weren't in the report. So again, please, if you can do that. But look, just to the acting CE and the staff, just yeah, again, just keep going hard. I mean, it's you're doing well, and we appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the final comment, and thank you, Mr Mayor. I think you summed up most of our thoughts within that statement, so thank you. We will. Is everyone happy now to move those 4 items as one? I thought you might be. Right. I have already read them out, so we will go to vote when we get the faces on the screen. So all those in favour, please raise your hands. Is there anybody against? And no abstentions. So that is carried unanimously. Right, we're now going to break for morning tea. So we will come back at 11:15, and that gives everybody a good... So 11:15, back. Okay, right, we're live and back and resuming our Finance and Audit Committee meeting. We are now up to item number 8, which is the Treasury Report, 9 months ending the 31st of March 2022, and that will be presented by Steve Patterson, our Strategy Manager of Finance. So over to you, Steve.
Madam Chair, councillors, good morning. This is a reasonably standard sort of report, as you'd be aware, each quarter. But I thought, and I'm taking it as read to an extent, although I thought it was useful for me to just highlight a couple of things to you, given the market as it stands at the moment, the financial market. As you'll be aware from your own activities, the financial markets are volatile at the moment. Interest rates are rising across the board. Investors in the types of loans that the council offers are moving towards being prepared to only invest for relatively short periods rather than long term. And our funding agency, the local government funding agency, are having to be innovative in the way in which they raise funds, because they're not necessarily available through the tender process that they would normally operate. So that reinforces for us a need to be thinking hard about the way in which we raise the funds that we do and to have the money available when it's required. As you're aware, the council is a borrower. It's not an investor in this market. It doesn't have any funds to invest in normal terms. It doesn't have cash, liquid investments. In terms of the council's actual debt that we've borrowed, that's in net terms remained the same at 167 million right through this year, each quarter of this year, although that does vary on a day-to-day and a month-by-month basis, depending on council cash flows. And so to ensure that we do have the funds available when they're required to meet maturing debt, I've mentioned before that we do raise some money in advance, so up to a year in advance, and that's covered off in the report as to the 3 occasions we've done that recently. As at the 31st of March, we had $35 million worth of funds in hand available to retire debt that's retiring within the next 12 months, and that sum was invested. Some of that has subsequently matured earlier this month, $10 million of it. So we've now holding, right as of today, $25 million worth of funds invested to retire debt in August and in April next year. I highlight in the report that one of the things in the council's treasury policy is about, if we do have investments, to not invest everything, all your eggs in the one basket, if you like. And in this period, we have invested all of those deposits, those short-term deposits, with the one bank, and that has exceeded what we had in our policy, and we did that on purpose because of the difference between the interest rates that were offered by that bank and the others, and we were keen to offset the cost of the borrowing with the fund we're going to get from the investment. So the policy is seen as being conservative, and it enables it to happen, but it means that if that happens, I need to just mention that in the reports to the council so that you're aware of that. So we've done that in the report. In terms of the average cost of the council's borrowings, for the year to date so far, that's just a fraction less than what we'd budgeted for the year. In our budgets, you'll recall, assumed 2.8%. I've also highlighted to you through the budget process that with those increasing interest rates, and they continue to increase actually more than what we were talking about earlier. So the latest sort of assessments of our portfolio are that over the next year or so, the current expectation is the average cost of debt could be as much as 3.4, increasing to 3.5 through to 4% over the succeeding years, based on what we know about the market about now. So we are needing to take that into account if we're assessing, doing cost-benefit analyses of things, that our borrowing rate's more likely to be sort of 4% going ahead rather than the 2.8 or 3.1 that we've assumed in our 10-year plan. At the moment, we haven't made any decisions about coming back to you with any suggestions for change to the annual budget, where we've made the assumption of 3.1, because that translates to an interest expense based on the levels of debt that we have assumed. And so I think we'll be looking at what our assumptions are about both levels of debt and interest rate and the total figures as part of what we come back to about. But anyway, in terms of where we're up to, this report is one looking back really at the last 9 months. And apart from that little issue about investing for more in one institution than what the policy envisages, everything else is within our policy framework that we have in terms of performance, and it's within our expectations in terms of budget. But as you'd be expecting and know from your other reports, the actual level of debt that we have net is lower than what we would have expected through the budget for this year, because our capital program is less than what we'd assumed it would be. So that, hopefully that gives a bit of a broad understanding of where things are at.
Thank you very much, Steve. Open for questions. So first up is Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Steve, for your report. My first question is in relation to the Standard & Poor's credit rating, which looks to be a good outcome. Steve, just a couple of thoughts on that though, and that's the question really comes from perhaps the earlier discussion around the unprecedented times that we're in, the funding levers that the council has to mitigate rate increases potentially. That credit rating, how does that compare to the credit rating of our peer group in terms of what is your view, Steve, or management's view of what's the minimum acceptable Standard & Poor's credit rating, and what sort of borrowing capacity or untapped borrowing capacity does that rating suggest that we have in terms of the council's balance sheet?
Two or three things I'd say in response to your queries in relation to the credit rating. We're expecting the feedback about that within the next day or so to confirm what their rating is. The issue for our credit rating is that their perspective when they're issuing the rating is only about 2 to 3 years out, about 3 years out in terms of looking at that, and it's making an assumption. It's based on the council's capacity really to meet its commitments in terms of repaying debt, basically servicing and repaying debt. And so we know, and they know too, that as the current 10-year plan stands, the council doesn't have that capacity under the current framework. So as the weeks and months go by, the current timetable for the wastewater project starts to come into the thinking of our credit agency, and they are not at this point at the point where they can categorically know that the Three Waters is going to happen when it's proposed to happen. So they are starting to take into account issues around our borrowing capacity, and I suspect there will be a slightly negative tone to their commentary back this time compared with last time, because those issues are starting to come closer to the time when they will have a real impact. So at the moment, with the council as it currently stands delivering the types of services that it does, and without thinking about the three waters being separated, then there is no headroom ahead for anything else really, because it hasn't got headroom to fund in the longer term what is proposed. We've made assessments over the last year or so about what might be the type of headroom that's left in the organisation if the Three Waters does move out of the council's operations. And at the time, through the adoption of the 10-year plan, we believed that what was left in the council, based on the plans that we had, was likely to mean that we wouldn't be able to live within some of the current ratios that we have, but we would be able to live within the ratios that the local government funding agency has, which were slightly higher than what we currently have in our policy. So it depends on what policy setting we have for ourselves in terms of those ratios as to what headroom we believe we have going forward and what we consider to be the core operations of the council. So there's obviously a lot of work yet to be done over the next few months to more formalise the Three Waters components, and obviously for the update our forecasts to incorporate the latest decisions that the council will make about deferments of projects and programs and the like.
Thank you, Steve. I guess that does in part, and I appreciate that there is some uncertainty, address some of my question, but not all of it. If you were to look at the 10-year plan now and the implied level of borrowings, what sort of credit rating for the council does that imply? And what's the lowest level of credit rating that you think would be an acceptable position relative to our peers and relative
yes.
our commitments to our funding providers?
As I said, the level of uncertainty is the key problem looking long term. The 10-year plan, if you were to assume that the Three Waters wasn't to happen in the time frames, it wasn't to happen at all, or in the time frames that are currently proposed, then the council would struggle to get any sort of acceptable credit rating. The current projections in the 10-year plan mean the council would not obtain a credit rating that was one that was anything other than speculative type of credit rating. So at the moment...
So what then, in terms of borrowing capacity, what's the difference between what is the bare minimum threshold credit rating and the capital requirement?
Well, at the moment, the majority of the peers of our council have the same credit rating that we currently have.
Okay.
There are a couple that have a notch lower at A+ type credit rating, and those ones are ones that are borrowing more or less to the limit of, their, really the local government funding agencies' borrowing ratios. And they won't have any capacity to borrow anything more than that as things currently stand. So, in our case, we obviously rely heavily in terms of credit and credit rating going forward on the assumption that the Three Waters programs will not be part of the council.
Okay, thank you for that. My second question, Steve, is around your assumption, which I guess has been in place for some months now, around reducing the planned capital spend by 30% each year for the purposes of assessing borrowings and what our hedging position should be. And I guess my question is, that was surely a holding assumption while you got better information. And I note the earlier comments around reprioritising the capital expenditure plan. I note all of the uncertainties that we're dealing with, and I just wanted to understand where you were at in terms of getting a better, more refined basis for assessing what the interest rate risk management profile should look like.
Yes. As you understand, the risk profile, understanding what our capital requirements are is fundamental to deciding what our profile should be and how much we should be setting in terms of the fixed profile. And that, in the environment over over the last 2 or 3 years, but particularly in the last few months and this year, has been particularly difficult to get any sort of certainty, and the staff in that area, as you know, are doing their best to try to do that. And what I'm relying on in terms of managing the council's debt portfolio is the intention that we have over the next very short while to have a further assessment to bring material to you for your consideration as the council in the next phase of the annual budget at the end of May. And once we have that material together, I'll have a better picture in order to be able to feed that into our models that we use for the risk profile. So for the moment, I've been sticking with the 30% figure because I have nothing that significantly better than that. But we're planning to update that profile before the end of June.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question, Steve, I guess relates to your comments on the counterparty limits.
Yes.
And my recollection is that these limits were set cognizant of the fact that you were pre-funding. And I just wanted to understand better the decision process and approval process that you went through in determining to, I guess, breach that counterparty exposure limit.
Yes. Well, in terms of the management of the portfolio, staff, including myself, have delegation to make quite significant decisions about the way in which the portfolio is managed. And so between the CFO and myself, we really manage that decision-making process. I utilise external advisors as well who helped in the beginning to develop the policy, and I checked with them about their, it's not their policy, it's ours, but in terms of whether they would think that the level of risk of exceeding those particular ratios for a short time was reasonable or appropriate. And whilst I can't, they're not accountable for it, I am. Their understanding was that, they didn't see any particular problem with it, as well, I guess, in terms of, and I don't either, because those figures are relatively conservative, and they're rolling off relatively quickly as well in terms of our cash flows.
Normally, these credit.
I was going to say as well, there is a requirement to, post the decision, to report that to the council, which I'm doing here.
Okay. I understand, Steve, the risk profile. Generally speaking, in order to change an approved counterparty limit, wouldn't that require a board or a council approval?
It would to change the limit, yes, in the policy, and that's what the policy says. But the policy does envisage that there could be reasons for exceeding them or breaching them at any particular time, and that if that happens, then the requirement, as written in the policy, is that gets reported at the council level. And I think the intention. You're right that we did take into account that there possibly might be a level of forward borrowing when the policy was set, but perhaps not to the levels that we're now undertaking. Certainly, we're borrowing quite a bit further ahead than what we initially thought we would at the time when the policy was first set. So we're revising or suggesting that those limits be revised the next time the policy's reviewed.
All right, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr Armstrong. Steve, just to follow up on that, so you're comfortable with the fact that we're exceeding the limit, that this is just going to be a short term, that it's not, or are you suggesting that further down the track that we will need to review that policy limit?
I'm suggesting that it's a relatively short-term issue for the moment, but that in time when we do next review the policy, probably not in advance of the normal review period every 3 years, but that we will address that as one of the things we address.
Okay, thank you. Okay, councillors, are there any more questions? I have no one in the queue and no one online, so thank you very much, Steve. I'm happy to move the recommendation that the committee note the performance of council's treasury activity for the 9 months ending the 31st of March 2022. Have a seconder, Councillor Naylor. And this is just our normal straightforward reporting from Treasury, and I think the only red flag, of course, is these interest rates, which no one knows. Who would have thought, after interest rates were only 1.9, 6 months ago, that we're now into 3.5 and 4%. So it's crystal ball gazing. So it's just another factor in all the things that we have to consider with running council, or staff have to consider with running council, which will make projects more difficult to deliver. Councillor Naylor, you wish to speak?
Yeah, thank you. Once again, a good report. I think it's a really timely reminder for us to look at how we prioritise our capital programs going forward. I mean, we've enjoyed the benefits of lower interest rates in recent years and have come under what has been budgeted for our carrying our debt in terms, and it looks like we're tracking towards the 5 million that's budgeted for interest this year. But looking at our long-term plan, only 4 years away, that 5 million actually turns into 20 million that our community have to pay in interest. So not only is it, in my view, it's not only the credit rating that we need to consider when we look at how much we decide to incur in terms of debt. We also need to think about how our community can afford to pay for servicing that level of debt. It's all very well saying we can increase our limit and then we'll be within our policy max. But, policy maxes are there for a very good reason, and that's about affordability for our community as well. So I think it's a timely reminder for us to realise that even taking, as the officer has said, even taking the 3 water components out, we exceed our borrowing limits. And I think as a council, we have not been good collectively at prioritising our capital program, and I think that's something we're going to need to get better at, and particularly going into the deliberations next month. I think understanding this broader context is really important.
Thank you, Councillor. There's no further people in the queue, so we will now go to voting. So all those in favour, raise your hand. And no, no one's against, just checking, and there was no abstentions, so that is carried unanimously. Right, we'll now move on to our next item, which is item number 9, and that's the options for reallocation of events-related budgets. And I will get the Chief Executive to introduce our new staff member.
Hi everyone. So I think we're probably most of you already know Anton, but some of you may not have had the opportunity to meet him yet. So I thought I would just take a quick opportunity. So I think Anton, you started 29th of November. So well and truly got the feet under the desk now, has been around the community and met a whole lot of people, and is already making a really great impact on the organisation. Just to remind you, Anton comes from quite a diverse background, has a very strong performing arts background, particularly in music, and you can talk to him about that later. Very interesting. I think you still do a bit of DJ, Anton, don't you? he can do it now. But also, look, Anton came from us from Wellington Museum prior to this, and has had many useful roles in the likes of the Ministry of Pacific Island Affairs, Education, Tertiary Education, and was the Chief Executive of Dance Aotearoa New Zealand. So, yeah, with no further ado, I give you DJ Anton.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Acting Chief Executive, for the introduction. Tēnā koutou e te rangatira, tarofa lava, tausasunga, tai Ali City Council. Greetings to the esteemed members. I'll take the report as read, but I would like to provide a short summary of the memorandum. The memorandum before you is a direct response to the notice of motion. Officers, in response to the notice of motion, officers identified a total of $235,000 as unspent event and program-related budgets. And this was made up from the major events team and from the City Library program activities. Officers undertook to engage with a variety of people related to the events sector to get a sense of what kind of support would have the most positive impact. Various options were looked at and tested for their viability and appropriateness in response to the notice of motion. And the reason that the full amount, there aren't options to spend the full amount identified, is because it wasn't realistic to spend the $235,000 within the appropriate time frame, which was obviously by the end of this financial year. Provided also with the memorandum is Appendix 1, which gives a list of all the successful applicants from the COVID Relief Fund. And there's a pie chart that gives you a breakdown to give you an idea of the weightings towards the three main criteria for the COVID Relief Fund. Just to note also that the paper was written before the traffic light changed on April the 4th, in particular in regard to Section 4.3. And the memorandum also provides just a short summary of other funding avenues from the City Council and central government in terms of COVID relief opportunities, just to give you a wider context of event support available. Thank you. That's the conclusion of my summary, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Anton. And I just want to mention that Anton is the Group Manager of Community Services, which we didn't mention to start off with for those online. Are there any questions for Anton? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for clarifying Anton's role. I don't think he wants us to call him DJ Anton forever. A couple of questions, Anton, if you don't mind. In item part 3 of the report, where option 1, the $100,000, I just wondered if you would explain why that $100,000 has come from library rather than events.
I suppose there's no delineation of the $235,000 as a whole. It was drawn from those two areas. So while the $100,000 could be seen to come from one area, it was really just seen as one whole amount. As part of the exercise in identifying unspent funds, various teams put up the money in terms of events or programs that they weren't going to be able to be delivered. So there's no, we're not picking on the library.
Good. We'll all be glad to hear that, I'm sure. Thank you for clarifying that. So I had a question about the consultation with the event sector, consultation is probably the wrong word, engagement with the event sector before you wrote this report, and some more proactive suggestions came forward, but those haven't been picked up. Could you explain what the thinking was there, please?
Yes, based upon the engagement with a range of different people, the main thing people were wanting was I suppose, a proactive kickstart response. So we investigated that very hard across the different teams, looking at the different options, whether we could invest in current funding streams, whether we could revitalise some previous funding schemes, and whether we could actually deliver a brand new funding scheme. Unfortunately, due to the timeframes in terms of the financial year and needing to spend this money within 2 months from today, for example, it just wasn't realistic. So therefore, the 100,000 was the amount that we had identified that would be realistic to be able to distribute within that 2-month period. Having said that, also sort of noted in the paper, going from traffic light red to orange, not that it's a council decision, but that decision that came does mean that we can be more proactive now in terms of setting up events, particularly for the major events team, also contracting events and for bookings for venues. So already within this month, we are starting to see, I suppose, what I call the bounce back from being in a red environment where pretty much very little can happen. So that's why there weren't more options in terms of potential different opportunities that we could do with the money. It's a little bit, I suppose, being prudent and ensuring, I suppose, the options we put up that we were able to deliver upon.
Thank you, Anton. That just leads to my last question, thank you, Madam Chair, which was about that move to orange. And I think we're seeing a bounce back, maybe not of the scale that we've seen in previous level shifts, but my anecdotal evidence is that events are keen to go ahead, but the audience is not showing strong signs of getting over their COVID-related hesitancy. Is that something that you're able to speak to?
Yes, I would confirm that that would be the feedback that we are receiving from event organisers. As opposed to the 2020 lockdown, I suppose the novelty of being locked down and then being released meant more people were willing to come out. I think because there is also a high level of COVID in the community, that there is a hesitancy for larger events, say particularly with an older audience, perhaps with a younger audience in terms of music events or festivals. We might see participation being quite strong. I think it will take probably at least 6 months to get back to not on a level of normal, but at least 3/4 full houses for various venues, and particularly, I suppose, for the community events to come back online as well. So, yes, you're correct. The bounce back won't be as strong, but it is, I suppose, it's a slow build over the next 6 months.
Thank you, Anton. Madam Chair, I'll just signal that I do have a proposed amendment to the recommendation, which the committee administrator
Yes.
should have.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'll come back to that later.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Just on in 4.4 on page 121 of the report, where the central government funding support options are outlined, at the bottom of that section it says officers are encouraging suitable applicants to register and apply for national funding where appropriate. Given that, the list in Appendix 1 of successful applicants, do we have any idea of how many of those applicants also applied to the government funding sources that are outlined there?
Of the list, my knowledge, I can confirm that there was only one person on the list of Appendix 1 that has registered for the Minister of Culture and Heritage Arts and Culture COVID Relief Fund, which was part of large-scale events that if they were cancelled, but you needed to be registered to then be able to apply. And that was part of, I suppose the issue was looking at, for example, of these groups, which ones were appropriate to apply to those central government criteria. So unfortunately, very few would meet that threshold.
And what about the MB funding that's available?
Probably a lot more, because that's the wage subsidy, but I wasn't able to, I suppose, investigate that further in terms of who was accessing the wage subsidy.
Okay, and just in terms of what's the organisations outlined in Appendix 1, were there other applicants that were unsuccessful, and if so, how many?
I can't give you the exact number, but there was a small percentage, maybe 10 to 15%, but I can get back with the specific numbers of those that were declined who didn't meet the criteria.
Okay, so the reason being that they didn't meet the criteria as opposed to a lack of funding? Or
Correct.
Was it so they didn't meet the criteria?
They couldn't show evidence that it was a loss of income or increased demand for activity.
Okay, and just one further question. So almost 200,000's been allocated to the 1st of April, so that's 9 months. So why would you think that we would need 100,000 for only the next 2 months?
I suppose it's just being sure that there is enough funding available once we advertise that there is more money available. For example, at the moment, the fund is exhausted, so we've turned it off so people can't apply. We have at least 3 applications on a waiting list, and I suppose part of, in response to the motion, was really highlighting the fact that the COVID Relief Fund is available for the city event sector to support, so I would expect more people to be applying to the fund.
Okay, sorry, one further question. So your comment around that now we're in orange, am I correct in understanding that that would assume that there was less of a need for this being in orange than there was in red?
It's hard to say. I can't gauge need because there may be people who are appropriate that could meet the criteria who don't know that they meet the criteria, and therefore that they would come forward for support. That is what we'd seen, I suppose, if you look back over the last 2 years with the fund, and particularly trying to have a focus on providing support for the city events sector, then there are some, I suppose, commercial entities or businesses that wouldn't normally come to council for support. So I would be expecting them to come forward.
Okay, thank you. There was just one other question, sorry, that's more of a financial. The budget, at the bottom of page 118, the additional budget of 100,000 that's allocated for the COVID Relief Fund for 2022-23, my recollection was that that was to come out of this year's budget as well, is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, that's not my understanding. We did put a budget provision in.
Oh, okay, no, maybe I'm getting my wires crossed on something else. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Anton, for this report. So I was just following on from some of the questions at the moment. With the orange setting, now that we've moved into an orange setting, and you've talked about how we're starting to see the bounce back. If we put that full 100K into this fund for this next, I guess, 2 months, would there be an opportunity for people who are trying to have events in this next 2 months but have less participants attend, I suppose? Will they be able to apply for the fund as well and sort of support that loss of income by people not actually, by being able to have the event but not have as many people show up to the event, even though we're in orange?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. It's a very tricky question. In terms of, to answer your question, no, they would not be able to apply because the way the COVID fund is set up is retrospective. And that is something that we did investigate, whether, we could have something which is more forward-focused. Also, I will note that there are current funds available that people could apply to host their events.
Okay. And so that would just, so that would be the funds that they apply to, I guess, have the events happen. But if there ended up being, if you ended up having an event and no one showed up and you ended up having a huge loss, I suppose, that was unexpected, would you not be able to, I guess, apply for that?
If you could show that it was COVID related, then the fund would be open for them to apply. I can't say whether they would get support because it would have to be assessed. But I think the beauty of the COVID Relief Fund is that it is quite open. So like you're saying, if there was an event that happened, it went ahead, but there was significant impact in terms of their income because of another outbreak or something happened that they could say was COVID related, then it's possible that they could apply. But I'm not saying that they would be supported.
Right. Awesome. Thank you.
Are there any more questions, councillors? Oh, sorry, I've missed Councillor Butt. Councillor Butt?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Anton. Just a quick question about the list on page 123. I can see that some of the groups are mentioned more than one time. Is it due to the multiple applications from the same groups or individuals, or there is some other criteria?
No, thank you, Councillor. Well spotted. Organisations can apply up to 4 times to the fund, and a maximum limit of 10,000 or 20,000 for the one organisation. So that's why you see multiple applications from a number of different groups, because at various stages they may have had an increased demand or loss of income. So they've applied, I suppose, in response to the need, as opposed to applying for one amount to cover costs that may incur in the future.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, thank you very much, Anton. There's no further questions, so you may step down now.
Thank you very much.
Yep. So, councillors, I am proposing to move option 2, and that is to not top up the COVID Relief Fund. And I have a seconder, Councillor Naylor. And my rationale for that is that this was supposed to be a one-off payment of $200,000, which we have already put $200,000 into the COVID Relief Fund. We've only got 2 months extra at the end of the year, and I don't want to rush just to spend, because we've got a surplus of $235 in one budget. I don't think we should be rushing to reallocate it into another budget. I think that if there is any real urgency for any organisation to need money at this stage, where we're now going into an orange light, changes from red to orange, I would rather see those applications coming in separate to council. I think council has a lot more priorities than this at the moment, and that $100,000, if we approve that, would not come off our bottom line. So that I think it's time that we've been very generous to our community with the COVID, so now I think it's time to just let them sort it out, go into orange, and that at a later stage into the next year's budgets, if there's any issues, then we can fully look at those in a proper outlined priority. But I'm really concerned that this money's just, oh no, we've got some spare, we'll just throw it into the COVID fund. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also happy to support option I think it was, not to fund this extra money. I think as council, we're being asked by our community to look at what our core business is and focus on that, particularly in the current environment where we are looking to impose high increases to rates. I think we need to be really careful that we do not adopt a social welfare type role that should more appropriately sit with government agencies. And I think this report outlines some of the government agencies that are responding to some of the needs that are out there. And I think if we provide money, of course there will be people that will apply for it. But I don't think that's the most appropriate place for them to be applying for it. I think they need to be going to MB and some of these other agencies. I think it's important, it was a one-off, and I think that was appropriate at the time, but it's important that we don't adopt this as business as usual. We need to remember that the people who will pay for this extra $100,000 are also struggling themselves with the impact of COVID, both individually and on their businesses. This is a targeted fund, but I question whether the benefits of that justify the cost to the overall ratepayers, essentially, of what this would mean. Even though it is money within the budget that's set this year, if we don't pay it, it will come off our bottom line. And as with the broader picture that we've looked at today with other reports, everything that comes off our bottom line saves interest, saves future money that they will have to pay in rates. So I think we need to be prudent and we need to consider who's actually paying for any additional money that's approved. So I'm happy to leave the fund as the $200,000 that was allocated, and I'm not happy to approve more.
Councillors, it's 12:02 and we have got sport and rec at 1 o'clock. So what I'm proposing to do is I'll adjourn this meeting till after sport and rec because I've got too many people in the queue to continue. So that's the prudent thing to do. So I will re-adjourn finance and performance after sport and rec. Okay, so see you back here at 1 o'clock for sport and rec.